Hey there, cheesemakers. All right, now that you're completely experts, welcome back to another round of cheese making. Once again, I'm Rin Caputo with Caputo Brothers Creamery. And what we're gonna do now is show you how to use our curds, the cagliata, not to make a fresh cheese like we've been doing, but to make an aged cheese, a young provolone style cheese we call provola, but is also often referred to as Scamorza. So this time, instead of just using 1 pound, you need 2. It's not that you can't make Scamorza with only 1 pound, but I find it's a lot easier to work with when you have 2. So we're gonna open both of these up and put them into our bowl. Now, before we get started, I need you to basically turn off everything you've learned from me about making mozzarella. Be gentle, be calm, be very careful. Well, all of that's about to change. It's very important to follow those instructions when you're working on the fresh side. But when we're working on the aged side, we need to treat the cheese a little differently. And that's because we want to get some of the moisture out. We want to get some of the butter fat out. We want to make sure that all of the lumps and bumps have been removed because we want the cheese to age appropriately. And in order to do so, we need to alter the way we're working the curds. This part, though, is still the same. I'm simply taking the curds and breaking them into quarter or silver dollar sized pieces. Once I have them all broken up, instead of adding salt, I'm going to pour the water directly in on the curds. The reason for that is when we're working with a fresh cheese, we salt directly to the curds, like we have been with the mozzarella, the stracciatella, and the burrata. But when we're working with an aged cheese, we want the salt to be on the outside of the cheese so that, it ages properly. That means that this time, instead of adding salt directly to the curds, we're going to put it in a salt brine. You'll notice that I have 2 bowls in front of me. One is my cold water bowl for finishing, and the other is my salt brine. We'll learn more about that later. Okay. So, super easy. Break up the curds and add your 190-degree water. Even though we have more curds, we're still just going to add enough hot water to cover those curds. So this is where things get a little different. We are going to stretch just like we did before, pushing into the wooden paddle, lifting up, and allowing the cheese to stretch under its own weight. You'll notice that working with 2 pounds is a little different than working with 1. Clearly, there's more cheese. But this time, we don't have to be so worried about being gentle, and we don't have to worry about overstretching the cheese, because that's actually what we want to do. If before we only wanted to get 80 to 90% of the lumps and the bumps out, now we want to get 110% of the lumps and the bumps out. I'm still allowing the cheese at this point to stretch under its own weight. And again, don't be afraid to really let it get a nice, good stretch. Now I'm going to switch to working with my hands. Just like we did before, I'm going to roll this under like we're folding the pair of socks and into the baguette, but instead of stopping there, I'm going to give it a nice good stretch. If you feel like the cheese is too taut, then just simply put it back down in the heat. Just a few moments in the heat will allow you to stretch it much easier. See that? There we go. Again, once it starts to get tight, Put it back down into the water and let it heat up. And I want to do this stretching maybe 4 or 5 times to make sure that I've worked out all of the lumps and the bumps. I give it a nice long stretch, fold it back in half, and get it back down into the water to heat up. Another technique you can use is when you stretch, you can actually give it a little bit of a twist. Again, our goal here is to make sure that we have all of those lumps and bumps stretched out. You'll notice that you have a lot more butter fat floating in your liquid gold. And that's because as we're continuing to work the cheese, we're getting some of the moisture and some of the butter fat out. Let's give this one more nice big stretch. Fold it in half and go back into the warm water. Now we're ready to make our ball of provolone, or provola as we like to call it. So I'm going to take one end and just start to push the rest of it in like we did, again, the folding sock technique. And we want to make sure that we have a smooth surface. See, as I'm pushing that in, it's getting nice and smooth. There we go. And then flip that over. I'm going to make a circle with my hands, and though it may be hard to see on the video, the cheese is slowly stretching under its own weight. All I'm doing is gently pushing the cheese together and allowing that to come to a seal at the bottom of the form. And we just want to keep letting that come together until that's stretched out. See how that's all together in one shape there? And I'll just dip that back into my hot water. And what that's going to do is let me seal that closed. We need to make sure that that's sealed or it's not going to age properly. All right, and right into our cool water. Nice and cold. What that's going to do is cool this down. We want to leave this in there for about 30 minutes to an hour, and that'll make sure that this entire form is cool all the way through before we put it into our salt brine. All right, now that we're nice and cool, okay, you can see we've got our beautiful little provolone here. We're going to move that into our fully saturated salt brine. The salt is going to absorb as it sits for about half an hour. What that'll do is create the salt crust on the outside so that once we tie this up and hang it, it can age properly. To create a fully saturated salt brine, you just want to take some regular water and add salt, continuing to stir it in until the salt starts to fall out in the bottom, basically until the water can't absorb any more salt. And that way the cheese will then float in the salt water, and you can just kind of move that around occasionally while it's sitting in there for 30 minutes. Welcome back. Our 30 minutes in the salt brine is done, and now we're ready to hang our cheese and get it into the aging process. You're going to need some butcher's twine or kitchen string. You want to go about arm's length give that a cut, and lay that down. Take the cheese out of the brine, laying the seam side down. Just like you would wrap a gift, bring it together in the center and flip it over. Go under the middle string and then under from the opposite direction and tie. We usually do 2 knots. And that's it. That's your beautiful ball of provola, ready to go in your aging cave. For your aging cave, you can either use a wine refrigerator if you have one. That's actually the perfect temperature, 52 degrees. For those of you who don't have a wine refrigerator, if you can find a place in your regular refrigerator to tie the string and simply put a plate underneath, you'll be able to age it in there. Within a week or 2, you'll have absolutely delicious provola. Enjoy!